The anime begins with Rick, a man in his 30s, undergoing intense training. His instructors note his significant improvement over the past 2 years, suggesting that the upcoming E-rank exam should be easy for him. They even worry that he might be too strong for the exam, but Rick humbly replies that he's still far from matching his teacher's prowess. The scene shifts to a bustling city's Adventurers Guild, where adventurers are registering for the E-rank promotion exam, where the receptionist hands out exam tickets and Rick signs up too. He recognizes the receptionist as Alya, a former colleague from when they both worked as guild receptionists 2 years ago. However, Rick is surprised to see her in this city, and Alya is equally surprised that he quit his receptionist job so abruptly. She was even more shocked to learn that he had switched careers to become an adventurer. But Rick acknowledges that it seems absurd for a man his age to start adventuring, as it's typically a young person's pursuit. However, their conversation is interrupted by a rude, drunken man who tries to persuade Alya to go out drinking with him. Despite her polite refusals, he persists and attempts to force her. Seeing this, Rick intervenes, urging the man to calm down, but the drunkard suddenly faints. Rick then lays him down, attributing his collapse to excessive drinking, and advises caution with drinking. Alya soon hands Rick his exam ticket, and he notices that his number is 4242, which makes him uneasy due to its unlucky connotation. Leaving the guild, Rick encounters a girl named Renette outside. Initially, he's too distracted by staring at her Mount Everest to notice her face, but when he does, he sees an attractive elf. However, back at the guild, some adventurers notice a palm-shaped imprint on the drunken man's armor. They wonder how anyone could bend steel like that and recognize the man as a former A-ranked adventurer wanted for assault. But Alya speculates that Rick might be responsible for the imprint. The scene then shifts to Rick undergoing a physical examination before the exam, surprising the doctor with his age of 32. The next test then measures the candidate's magic power using a crystal that lights up based on their power level. One by one, the examinees take their turns, achieving decent results. However, when Rick's turn comes, the crystal emits a dim light barely brighter than a candle flicker. This causes the other candidates to mock him, believing they've never seen someone so weak. But to their surprise, after Rick leaves, the crystal shatters. The scene soon transitions to the next test, where the examiner explains that they must hit a slime bag with all their strength to measure their offensive capability. They are allowed to use any type of attack, as the slime bag can absorb high impacts. But this made Rick recall his training, where his master told him that true strength lies in one's body, and that to build a reliable body, you must destroy a golden slime bag with his bare fists. Rick noted that golden slime bags are as tough as a dragon's fang, and no human could possibly break them with their fists. However, Rick's crazy master insisted that such feats were normal for any adventurer. Demonstrating his own prowess, he effortlessly destroyed a bag with just a touch, boasting that he could obliterate 200 of them simultaneously. He then commanded Rick to punch the bags 50,000 times daily as part of his training regimen. Soon, the examinees then take turns punching the slime bag, with the examiner assessing their abilities based on the impact they make. Next up is Freed, a cocky noble, and the other examinees recognize him as the second son of the Diremut family, regarding him as a genius. He makes a grand display of his magic, but only manages to create a small flame that is smaller than your willy to hit the slime bag. Despite this, he maintains an arrogant demeanor, and the examiner also praises him as a genius. Rick, however, doubts whether the magic used was truly third-class pyro magic, recalling the vastly more powerful fire spells of one of his teachers. However, he considers the possibility that Freed condensed his spell to suit the indoor setting, acknowledging the skill involved. The other examinees continue their tests, and Rick is amazed by the green slime bag's ability to absorb so much damage. But when it's his turn, the examiner, noting Rick's age, comments that an adult's mana doesn't grow, and his mana measurement results were terrible. He advises Rick to quit adventuring, a sentiment shared by others in the room. Despite knowing all this, Rick refuses to give up, recalling his arduous training where he persevered even after hitting the golden slime bag 20,000 times. Determined to prove himself, he accidentally bursts the slime bag with a single punch, shocking everyone in the room. They soon move on to the next test, where Rick impresses everyone by surviving the examiner's attack. Astounded, Freed admits to himself that even he couldn't block a 4th level spell, yet Rick did it with ease. The examiner commends Rick, amazed that he blocked the attack with 1st level defensive magic. But when the examiner announces he'll use a 5th level spell and urges Rick to use a higher tier spell to defend, Rick admits he can only use level 1 offensive and defensive magic. Surprised by Rick's precise mana control, the examiner is nonetheless annoyed and decides to go all out, chanting a powerful 5th level spell, which Rick blocked with ease. However, a first-ranked knight named Sylvester, having noticed the spell from afar, arrives at the exam venue. He questions the use of high-level spells in an E-rank promotion exam, and the examiners explain that an F-rank adventurer had sent a green slime bag flying with his bare hands, even blocking his 5th-level magic with a 1st-level spell. Initially, Sylvester finds this hard to believe until he reviews Rick's information, discovering that Rick worked as a receptionist at the Tiger Road Guild branch for 14 years, wondering if receptionist is a title for dragon slayers, but is disappointed to learn otherwise. Later, Rick takes the written test and, upon finishing, meets up with Reinette. She asks how his exam went, and he confidently says he should get full marks. She thinks this is expected given his 14 years as a guild receptionist. However, Rick remains uncertain about passing the practical exams as his mana was ranked F-. Reinette reassures Rick that he should be fine given his astonishing growth over the last 2 years. Suddenly, the cocky brat from earlier approaches, but Rick can't seem to remember his name, and the brat reintroduces himself as Fried Diramut. Confused, he asks if he's lost, angering Fried, who accuses Rick of ruining his chance to showcase his greatness through the exam. The boy soon starts crying, and his sister Angelica arrives, vowing to make Rick pay for upsetting her brother. The boy tells her that the 40-year-old man bullied him, and Rick corrects him, saying he's still in his 30s. However, ignoring him, Angelica throws her glove at Rick, challenging him to a duel. To their surprise, Rick picks it up, thinking about how laundry isn't easy, only to realize he's accepted the duel. The scene then shifts to the arena, where Angelica declares herself a second-class royal knight, ready to punish Rick. She explains that duels in the Fim Kingdom allows the winner to set terms for their victory, and that she intends to make Rick her lifelong slave if she wins. Rick asks Reinette how strong a second-class royal knight is, and she tells him they maintain peace in the kingdom, and are as strong as A-rank adventurers. This freaked him out, considering he's just an F-rank adventurer, fearing that he might die. However, Reinette reminds him of his training, sending Rick into PTSD, causing him to vomit. Surprisingly, he's not nervous anymore, and Reinette encourages him, reminding him he's part of the powerful Orichalcum Fist. Preparing to fight, Angelica warns Rick to be ready to meet his fate. She promises to hold back since he's an F-rank adventurer and enhances her body and weapons with magic. She then speeds past Rick, who is surprised by her swiftness. Watching from the stands, Fried boasts that his sister is nicknamed Lightspeed Angelica because of her incredible speed. However, Rick perceives her movements in slow motion and easily dodges, stunning Angelica, as is hard to believe since even first-rank knights struggle to react to her speed. Angelica attacks repeatedly, but Rick finds her movements slow, wondering if she used connections to become a royal knight, which led to him considering that he might be stronger than he realized. However, during one of her attacks, Angelica stumbles on a rock, tumbling towards Rick, who narrowly avoids her strikes, thinking it was a terrifying technique. Determined, Angelica decides to move even faster despite the strain it puts on her body, as she can only use this technique 3 times. She swiftly charges at Rick, who still finds her slow but remains cautious. But he dodges again, and Angelica, frustrated, decides to go full speed until she lands a hit. But as Angelica charges for the last time, she trips on a rock again, messing up Rick's timing. She narrowly escapes his punch, but is terrified by the destruction caused by his power. They soon demand to know who he is, and Rick explains his backstory, admitting he has to give his all against her because she's strong. This freaks Angelica out even more, leading her to surrender. Puzzled by her surrender, Rick suddenly remembers their promise before the duel. However, right after hearing this, she runs away as fast as she can to avoid this fate. This led Rick to wonder if it's alright for him to win like this. But Reinette reassures him that it's fine and reminds him that the results of the first round of exams will be announced soon. Suddenly, Reinette mentions that other members of Orichalcum Fist will be dropping by later, which revives his PTSD, knowing that nothing good ever comes from their visits. In the next scene, a legend is told about a warrior who once faced the supreme monster Kaiser Alsipete in a quest to conquer a treasure capable of granting any wish, the Akashic Records. However, this warrior never managed to defeat the mythical creature and believed that someday, a child with dreams of becoming an adventurer would obtain the treasure. Back in the current kingdom of Philum, the results of the preliminary tests for Rank E are about to be announced. If the magical energy transmitted to each exam card is blue, the candidate has passed. Tomorrow, the approved candidates will participate in a simulated battle in the second stage of the exam. Rick is tense, knowing that another failure could mean his definitive withdrawal, given his age. His card soon begins to glow, fluctuating from blue to red before finally confirming his approval. Upon leaving the room, Rick smells something awful and encounters a young nobleman charming Reinette. The nobleman introduces himself as Raster Diramut, the eldest son of the House of Diramut, which governs the land from north to south. He asks the maiden's name, and she responds that she is Reinette Elfelt. Rick also introduces himself, but Raster dismisses him as an irrelevant fool. He then continues to flirt with Reinette, stating that he has lost his heart to her and would like to take her to the northern lands as his second wife. Seeing the situation deteriorating, Rick intervenes, claiming to be Reinette's boyfriend to ward off Raster's advances. Raster mocks Rick's F-rank card, but Rick retorts that Raster is also no longer a kid to be taking the rank E exam. However, Raster seizes the opportunity to boast that he passed the E-rank exam at only 14 years old and is now an A-rank adventurer, even serving as the examiner for the simulated battle. Full of himself, he shows his credentials and advises Reinette to leave Rick and dine with a real adventurer. Reinette politely declines, stating that she is with Rick and adding that Raster's cologne is so strong it's causing her discomfort. Outraged, Raster calls Rick fifth-rate trash and tells him to prepare for the simulated battle, promising to show the difference between them and knocks some sense into Reinette. After Raster leaves, Rick apologizes to Reinette for claiming she's his girlfriend, but she confesses that the story made her happy and resolved the issue. Meanwhile, back at his palace, Raster drowns his sorrows in drink, cursing Rick's life. Suddenly, his siblings arrive in tears, complaining that a 30-year-old commoner made fun of them during the first test. Infuriated, Raster vows to make the man pay, suspecting it might be Rick. Freed then remembers the man's registration number was unlucky and jokes that the guy was going to die, confirming Raster's suspicion. A few days later, the time for the simulated battle arrives. Before the test, Reinette asks Rick to go easy on people, but he replies that he's not even capable of going hard, unlike the northern playboy, who will probably beat him. Feeling doomed, Rick starts to cry until a man named Lynx Laura introduces himself as Rick's examiner for the battle, responsible for attendees numbers 4200 and above. Realizing that his registration number is 4242, Rick immediately celebrates. However, Lynx praises Rick, saying that his decision to quit his job at 30 to become an adventurer has restored hope for him, as he dreams of one day being like Rick. He then recalled that he started as an adventurer at 24 and only got his career going after 30. Now 40 years old, he sees Rick as an example of determination and intends to fulfill his dream of reaching A rank, despite it taking him almost 20 years to reach B rank. Rick enthusiastically greets the man, and although Lynx emphasizes that he will not show favoritism in the exam, he invites Rick for a drink after the test. Meanwhile, Raster eavesdrops on their conversation from his hiding spot, waiting for the examiner to pass by so he can approach him. With the weight lifted off his shoulders, Rick feels much more relaxed for the battle. However, one of the organizers suddenly enters the concentration room and informs everyone that Lynx Laura, the examiner for candidates 4200 and above, has suddenly fallen ill, and given this situation, Raster Diarmut will take over these candidates. Reinette had already suspected there would be a problem, considering Rick had crossed paths with the 3 Diarmut sons. Suddenly, an adventurer laments Raster being the examiner, known as the Man of 1,000 Skills, a genius who reached A rank at just 17 years old. Worse, he has another nickname, the F-rank Crusher, known for harassing candidates for pure entertainment. Desperate, Rick asks Reinette what to do now. Despite not understanding all the drama, Reinette reassures him that since other people's words can give or take away confidence, Rick is a strong man capable of passing the tests and defeating Raster. Ever since Rick decided to become an adventurer, all he's done is succeed. Hearing these words, Rick feels more motivated to continue his journey. Suddenly, a hooded kid approaches Rick, offering to read his fortune for free, sensing a man fighting his own demons. With nothing better to do, Rick accepts and sits in the chair, falling into a magical trap and vanishing. The kid then reveals himself to be Freed Diarmut. Enraged, Reinette cuts the kid's crystal ball in half, blowing up the wall behind him in the process, and grabs Freed by the collar to find out where Rick has been sent. But when he refuses to cooperate, she cuts half of his eyelashes and warns that next time it will be his eyes. Panicked, Freed admits it's a teleportation spell that reaches 90 meters, meaning Rick isn't far. The scene then reveals that Rick ended up behind the test area, greeted by an elite guard and his cronies. Realizing he's being sabotaged by the Diarmut family, Rick discovers the strength of the men surrounding him is equivalent to B rank, and the leader can take on A rank warriors. Rick's fate seems sealed, but the Orichalcum fist suddenly appears on the hill. The orc, seeing this, reminds Rick that he has a test and asks what the hell he's doing there. However, Rick tries to lie, stating that these men around him are helping him warm up for the simulated battle. The orc then offers to help too, causing Rick to despair and tell the elite guards to run for their lives. The guards, not feeling threatened, attack the orc. One strikes the orc's head with a hammer, which crumbles without causing any damage. Unsatisfied, the man attacks the orc's arm, prompting the orc to break his wrist. To everyone's surprise, the orc heals his attacker's hand and explains the importance of balance and weight compensation for a stronger punch. emphasizing that the body is a completely connected mass that can't be ignored. Hearing these words, the elite guard's leader realizes who these people are. Meanwhile, the orichalcum fist boy pulls out his magical weapon, Juliet, loaded with magic stones and lead bullets. He then attacks 3 enemies in front of him, leaving Rick stunned. However, the guards take the orichalcum girl hostage and order everyone to surrender, threatening to harm her. Rick and the orc warn the man to let her go before something worse happens, and the girl asks her friends what the guy behind her is doing. He then explains to Alice that the man is just trying to play, so she asks what kind of game it is. Losing patience, the guard punches her to keep her quiet, awakening the child's fury. She soon destroys everything around her with 7th nature composite magic. The guard's leader bows his head and explains that this girl, only 10 years old, is the most powerful vampire mage, known as the Demon Child of Devastation, Alice Drackle. As for the other member, who looks like a boy, he's actually a half-elf, half-dwarf, over 50 years old with techniques a millennium ahead of his time. He's the greatest weaponsmith in the world, Mezet Elborf, known as the Millennial Workshop. Lastly, the orc possessing unparalleled physical strength and intelligence, able to use all existing support spells, is called Broston Ashork, the Wise Beast. According to the guard leader, the 3 A-rank adventurers make up the continent's most legendary group, the Orichalcum Fist. For the first time in his life, the old man sees these 3 with his own eyes, drops his weapons, and declares he will retire to live the rest of his life in peace. With that said, Alice annihilates the remaining guards while Rick celebrates his chance to take the test. Back with Reinette, the adventurer surprises Freed, who thought the old man was as good as dead. The elf gets rid of him ruthlessly. Then Lynx appears, injured, and reports that Raster did this to him. As if that weren't enough, before giving the examiner a beating, the hare asked what his dream was. Coming from humble beginnings, Lynx's dream is to open a school for kids who want to be adventurers but have no opportunities. Hearing this, Raster locked Lynx up and scorned his attempt to educate society's scum, saying a third-rate teacher will produce students just as rotten. Lynx was furious at this insult but couldn't respond to the noble. Thinking about this, the examiner asks Rick to give up the exam, not knowing what he's getting into. But Rick has no intention of giving up. Returning to the arena, Raster sees one of his guards fall unconscious and deduces that Rick is on his way. The noble would love to crush that man's dreams without even allowing him to try. But since he'll have the displeasure of a direct clash, he wonders if he can make F-rank suffer in another way, making hell seem like a playground for Rick. While Raster tormented the poor trainees in the yard, one of the men on the benches above watched and laughed at the scene. This man had a unique ability to observe someone's stats and determine their abilities. There are 4 major abilities in this world: physical strength, magical strength, speed, and dexterity. Enjoying the show, he checked each participant facing Raster, predicting how badly they would be defeated. Another trainee with average stats faced Raster and was immediately decimated by Raster's lightning magic, causing Adolphe to laugh hysterically. Out of curiosity, Adolphe checked Raster's stats, confirming that Raster had an incredible amount of magic befitting an A-ranker. However, looking at Raster's stats for too long made Adolphe's eyes hurt due to their intensity. He then noticed that another person was ready to face Raster and dismissed him as insignificant due to his age. However, Adolphe decided to check Rick's stats and was shocked to find that Rick had max stats in all categories except magic. The sight of his stats caused intense pain in Adolphe's eyes, making him roll on the floor in pain. Meanwhile, Reinette found Alicia, who had come to watch Rick's final exam, and invited her to sit with the rest of her party. Alicia was initially scared to see an orc and a demon vampire, but was quickly reassured by Reinette. The orc then asked Reinette about Rick's chances, and without hesitation, she replied that Rick would easily pass the exam. Upon hearing this, Alicia was doubtful, pointing out Raster's superior magic and how he overwhelmed the weak trainees. Initially, the orc looked concerned but relaxed upon learning Raster was an A-ranking adventurer, confident that Rick could handle it. On the battlefield, Raster commended Rick for getting past his guards but warned him not to think too highly of himself, as the guards were commoners while he was an A-ranking prodigy. Rick then asked why Raster became an adventurer, to which the cocky brat replied that he was a genius who wanted to add an A-ranking adventurer title to his resume to bring more prestige to his noble family. However, Raster admitted he didn't respect adventurers and saw them as peasants. The battle soon began with Raster shooting an ice blast toward Rick, which missed as Rick stood still. He continues to laugh, wanting to toy with Rick to scare him. Meanwhile, Rick tried to remain calm, remembering Reinette's advice to observe his opponent. Believing Rick was too scared to act, Raster decided to finish the battle quickly. He used his extremely strong flame magic, blasting Rick with it, but to everyone's surprise, Rick emerged unscathed. Alicia was shocked, but the orc explained that a tiny attack like that couldn't harm Rick's body. He explained that among the 4 core attributes, magic could only be trained until the age of 20. Since Rick started training at 30, his mana pool couldn't increase. Therefore, the orc focused on enhancing Rick's physical toughness, starting his training by making Rick wear 100 kilograms ankle weights, which was equivalent to your mother's weight, and forced him to run through a forest filled with demonic snakes. Back on the battlefield, Raster decided to unleash an even stronger spell from his arsenal and blasted Rick with wind magic, sending waves of stormy winds at him. Yet again, Rick stood his ground, unmoved. Angered, Raster used a lightning spell, but Rick persevered through it effortlessly. Confused by Rick's resilience, Alicia asked Reinette for an explanation. She then revealed that Rick was as strong as an S-ranked adventurer, but the catch was that he didn't know it himself. All this time, the orc trainer had deceived Rick, telling him that even an F-ranked adventurer could outperform him, while Rick was actually cracking boulders with his punches. Inside the arena, Raster lost his composure and went all out, unleashing a barrage of magic at Rick simultaneously. Convinced that Rick would be dead this time, Raster watched in disbelief as the dust cleared to reveal Rick breaking a giant boulder in half. Shocked by Rick's sturdiness, Raster decided to take matters into his own hands. Reinforcing his body with magic to make his fists harder than steel, he rushed at Rick with extreme speed. However, Rick remained unfazed, throwing a lazy punch that connected with Raster's, sending him flying. But Raster soon regained his balance and landed on his feet, bewildered at how Rick resisted his attacks. Having observed enough, Rick concluded that Raster's incredible mana pool was poorly utilized due to his lack of rigorous training. Every move Raster made was unpolished and inefficient, giving Rick confidence that he couldn't lose to this noble brat. Raster, now serious, unleashed his strongest fire magic, but even this was effortlessly blocked by Rick, who stopped the attack with his hand. He then attempted to do a sneak attack, rushing at Rick, but was counterpunched immediately. However, Raster managed to change his body to steel just in time, barely avoiding meeting my uncle in heaven. Covered in dust, Raster still refused to acknowledge Rick's skills, calling it coincidence. This enraged Rick, who recalled his intense training where he survived in a dragon's nest, ran through explosions, and drowned in a venomous pond. He then remembered the elf pushing him off a cliff, Alice crushing him beneath a rock, and being hit by falling logs while training with Reinette. However, thanks to the orc's special healing magic, Rick was successfully revived and pushed past his human limits. Back at the present, Raster used earth magic to bind Rick with strong roots. He then began chanting a long spell that created a tree golem, telling Rick to say his prayers. But Rick, confident in his level 1 airshot magic that he had practiced millions of times, broke through bondage. As Raster descended to finish Rick with a magical punch, Rick countered with his own punch, which sent a huge shockwave through the arena. Initially confident, Raster was shocked as Rick's airshot overpowered his magic, shattering the tree golem into pieces and blasting Raster into the benches, leaving him unconscious. Upon witnessing Raster's defeat, the crowd was stunned that the strongest examiner was defeated by an unknown old man. The scene then shifts to Rick reuniting with his friends, who congratulated him on passing the test. But before they could celebrate with lunch, Raster, accompanied by his siblings, approached Rick. He then promised to be the examiner for Rick's promotion exam and vowed to defeat him next time. That evening, as the results for the passing adventurers were unveiled, Rick and Reinette eagerly awaited his name, wondering about the adventures that lay ahead. This then concludes the 3rd episode's recap of this anime. If you enjoyed this video and want more of it, go ahead and hit that like button down below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you everyone for helping us in reaching 5,000 subscribers. Let's continue to grow this community and help us reach a new goal of 10,000 subscribers.